All right, guys. All right, we are starting the next panel. How are you guys holding up right now? We're good? Can I hear something? Some noise? All right, there we go. So this is How Can Retail Truly Become Circular panel. And we touched on that a little bit before in the last keynote. And so I will give it to the panelists and our hosts to introduce themselves. And after this, we have lunch. Lunch and networking time downstairs. All right.
All right. Thank you, everybody, for being here. And our topic today, as mentioned, is how do we make retail truly circular? Sustainability and retail are two topics that we hear about a lot. Especially as Gen Z and young millennials are so outspoken about it. We have three incredible panelists here to talk a little bit more and answer questions that have been unanswered for the past few years. So first we have Lisa Guerrera, did I pronounce that right? The co-founder of the science-backed beauty sustainable brand Experiment. Then we have Nadia Okamoto, who is the founder of the menstrual care brand and the sustainable brand August. That's right. And then finally we have the chief commercial officer of BOWERY Farms, Katie Seawell. So yeah, welcome everybody and thank you so much for being here. I kind of want to start off by asking each of you a little bit more about what your brands are about and how do you incorporate sustainability into your business models. We'll start with you, Lisa.
Cool. Hi everyone, I'm Lisa. Just a high level on Experiment. We're a science-backed Gen Z beauty brand. We focus on skincare. And when we think about sustainability, we have like three pillars that we tend to follow when we make products. So the three things that go into like both branding and product for us is like how do we make all of our products clinically backed, thoughtfully sustainable, ridiculously fun. Those are the three things they all have to follow that we think are like the recipe for like success with the next generation of consumers. So let's like dive into the thoughtfully sustainable part. As a science-backed brand, like I think one of the unique approaches that we have is that we view sustainability not necessarily as just like an aesthetic thing or a marketing thing. Like we view it as like kind of the next wave of transparency. So like we've talked about greenwashing extensively. I'm sure you all have heard about it. But just the idea of like using sustainability as kind of just this like branding tool rather than having any substance behind it. So think, just throwing products in glass packaging and calling that sustainable, that's actually not as sustainable as you might think it is when you look at the data. So for us, the way we approach sustainability is completely through like a data-backed, science-backed approach. Data-backed, oh no.
The mics, I think.
Mics off. Oh wait, there we go. A data-backed, science-backed approach. So we actually verify all of our sustainability claims with a third-party partner called Bluebird that verifies both our carbon and waste outputs for every single product that we release. And they do that through our ingredient supply chain, our packaging supply chain. So we're verifying all of that before we make any claims around recyclability, refillability, all of that. And then we communicate that to our customer with, how much carbon output does our serum have in comparisons to other serums on the market. So that's really how we approach it, is like that science-backed sustainability.
I'm Nadia. I run August, and we make tampons and pads. I came into this business after spending like 8 years in the period space from the nonprofit angle. And a lot of the major period brands were clients of mine. And I think that a lot of what August is a result of, for years, feeling really frustrated with the lack of sustainability in the space. I think that because menstruation is so stigmatized, like we don't have the same level of accountability because there's less conversation about it. But most pads out there take 5 to 8 centuries to decompose, and the average maxi pad has enough plastic for 3 to 5 plastic bags. And so I think as there's this wave of more sustainable CPG brands that are trying to replace like everyday products, like what could be more necessary than period products? Originally, when I started the brand, I thought we were going to do menstrual cups, like do something very sustainable, something you could buy once and you would like have forever and never have to use another single-use plastic item. But I think a lot of what we do is also really rooting everything we do into community. And so when we actually talked to our community, which we built on Geneva, we were talking to our community and we were talking to them about period products. The majority of them had never heard of menstrual cups, but also the majority of them have never stuck anything besides a tampon up their vaginas, right? So there was kind of this like aversion to using something that's like this wide, right? When you're like 13 years old and you don't like touching your period blood. So all that to say, I think that the way we think about sustainability is how do we meet people where they're at and be more sustainable while not sacrificing on efficacy or comfort, but actually introducing products that are competitively priced but work better and are more comfortable. So it's like a no-brainer in deciding. So we introduced, pads that in ideal conditions take 12 months to decompose and are plastic free and they're a lot more comfortable. And we talk very openly about like, hey, we have a plastic applicator on our tampons, but let's talk about why that is, because like cardboard applicators are fucking mean, so I think that that's really how we kind of came into the market, was like, hey, we're sustainable period care that actually works and actually works better. And yeah, I think similarly, I'm 25, so I'm on the older side of Gen Z. Probably our 13-year-old team members would say that I'm like a zillennial. But I would say the way we think about sustainability is just trying to be as transparent as possible, because it's really fucking confusing, right? Like carbon neutral, we know that's a buzzword, but we don't really know what that means. Like we kind of came out and we were saying, for the most part, planting trees is kind of bullshit. So like this is what we mean when we say we're offsetting our carbon, here's what it looks like. Hey, we do have plastic in our tampons, but let's talk about why. We do have a very progressive base and we have a very viral base. So like between me and the brand, we have like 5 million followers on social media, and that following is like all about holding brands accountable, which we love and we celebrate. But I think because of that, we kind of approach talking about sustainability in a very much like constant progress, let's learn together sort of way. And I think we are primarily serving a generation where this paradox exists, where there's a lot of anti-capitalist sentiments, but they're buying everything on Amazon and are like the biggest consumers in world history, right? So we kind of try to really take along our younger consumers in even understanding some of the business decisions. So we are available on Amazon. We just launched in Target. And when we did that launch in Target, like we actually had town halls and community events and like social posts going up where we said, hey, what does this mean as we're working with bigger corporations, this like big scary word? Like what does that mean? But how is retail actually more sustainable than direct consumer? And like, let's talk about that. Let's talk about how Amazon is maybe allowing for us to reduce some of that carbon footprint because we're not doing direct to consumer in so much smaller packages. So yeah, transparency is key. I think a lot of it is also coming out and being like, look, I'm not a sustainability expert, but we will surround ourselves with experts and advisors, and like, we might fuck up, but like, call us out on it and let's build together.
All right, it's great to be here, everyone. I'm Katie Sewell, and I am the Chief Commercial Officer at BOWERY Farming, and I'm just super inspired. I've been here to catch one panel before this, but to see the entrepreneurship and the founders who are looking to make the world a better place is super inspiring. At BOWERY, core to what you've heard on the stage, our business model is actually about sustainability. We are the largest indoor vertical farming company in the US, and our ambition is to transform a portion of the food system, essentially supply chain. If you look at the food system, it is highly complex, it's highly fragmented, it has a huge impact on the environment. Just a couple things to kind of pull through there, because I actually think food is an underreported contributor to climate change and the resource constraints we have today. But a stat you'll hear us talk a lot about at BOWERY is a UN global stat, which is by 2050, the world population will hit 10 billion people, which means we're going to have to increase food production by 40% more than we do today with fewer resources. So how are we going to think about that? How are we going to do it more healthful for people and the planet? If you look at some other dimensions, climate change specifically, food waste, in terms of greenhouse gas emissions, would be the third largest country in terms of contribution to that, behind the US and China. All the inputs in the food system account for about a third of greenhouse gas emissions. If you look at fresh water, right, we're hearing stories pop up every day. I think the last one was in Phoenix, Arizona. They've suspended development because there is no water, right? So we need to think differently about how we're transforming our food system. The approach that we're taking at BOWERY is we're essentially trying to flip the paradigm on its head, which is create a fully integrated growing system closer to the cities we serve that grows as much healthy food as possible with fewer resources. And what that looks like, if you can visualize it, is we are refurbishing warehouses in a completely controlled environment, stacking our crops floor to ceiling, using LED lights to mimic the spectrum of the sun, and then core to our operations is the BOWERY operating system, which integrates sensors, vision systems, and robotics and automation to maximize efficiency in terms of production in the farm and monitor the plants 24/7 in the farm, which means we are able to grow more precisely than traditional agriculture in terms of inputs. So I think core to what we do is about sustainability. And the other thing I'd love to build on before we open up for discussion, and I think Nadia, you did a great job of bringing this forward. At BOWERY, we hold kind of three ideas of sustainability in our head, right? There's the environmental piece, there's the social piece, but there's the economic piece, right? And if you can't build an economically sustainable business, the other two pieces fall away. So I think really focusing on how you can build a profitable business, at least if you're in the for-profit space, is important in meeting your agenda too.
Thank you. I want to build off of what you mentioned a little bit about, using LED lights and a little bit about being efficient in general. I think indoor vertical farms have been known to, as you said, probably be one of the most sustainable models in terms of farming, much more than outdoor farming. They use less space, but I guess one of the challenges is the energy efficiency part, and also just being very high cost and very expensive to set up. So how is BOWERY sort of dealing with that challenge?
Yeah, so I think the energy consumption piece comes up all the time because it is true. There's two big drivers of energy consumption in indoor vertical farming. One is the LED lights that you mentioned, Jeena, and the other is actually HVAC, because we are dealing with a highly controlled environment, and monitoring the temperature in the farms is hugely important to driving increased yield, quality, and taste. One of the biggest things we can do, and I think this is really important when you're thinking about the environment, is a material assessment of your business, right? You can't measure everything. It doesn't make sense to measure everything. So what are those things that are actually going to move the needle? So for us, energy consumption is one of them, but we also know scale and output is one of the biggest levers we have to drive efficiency through the system and drive efficiency in energy consumption, which is why we're very focused on yield and output and efficiency coming out of the farm. You have technological advancements that are happening every day, which is fantastic. We've got a commercial farm in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. It's our third commercial farm. LED lights are 15% more efficient there than our original farms. And the other thing that we're focused on right now is renewables, right? And I think this is, again, where we think it's a multi-stakeholder approach. We pull renewable energy for all of our farms right now. We're fortunate enough that we're in municipalities where we're pulling off the grid, that's possible. That's not always the case throughout the United States. We were looking at Florida a little bit, and that wouldn't be an option today. It would be future state, but that's another way we're tackling it. So those are just some of the things. I think our footprint in terms of transportation is much lighter, again, because we're growing closer to the point of consumption, so you don't tag on the food miles. In terms of economic sustainability or profitability, you're going to hear me repeat some things here, but again, what drives that cost curve down in the farms is absolutely maximizing production and product out of the farm. But even within that context today, we are pretty close to price parity, at least with the organic segment in the stores, if not the conventional field-grown product yet, and we have broad distribution. You'll find us in Whole Foods, but you'll also find us in Walmart. And I think what you're seeing on the retailer side is they're understanding the business risk to supply continuity if they don't think differently about their purchasing of produce and fresh food as well.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting point that you brought up about also the role tech plays in, you know, the success of your brand and the success of the indoor farming model. I want to ask you, Lisa, a little bit, as a science-backed beauty brand, what role does tech or AI play in sort of furthering your sustainability or circularity efforts?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. So in beauty, I'd see it as like two pieces. There's kind of like the supply chain piece of how you design your supply chain to have ingredients that are more sustainable or packaging that's more sustainable. I'd say right now the conventional idea of what's sustainable in beauty, which I think is a really false idea, is the idea that like plant-based is the most sustainable thing you can do when creating beauty products. That's actually one of the least sustainable things you can do. I hate to break it to you. Because there's an entire supply chain around all these plant extracts, how they're grown. Rose essential oil takes a ton of like not just plant resources, but land, fossil fuels to harvest those plants. I think there's a lot of misunderstanding around the supply chain around plant-based ingredients. So, you know, that is something that I think people need to look a little bit deeper on. The word plant-based sounds great, sounds sustainable, but in fact, in the same way that vertical farming is actually a much more like efficient process, like that is also something that people need to look at. So the kind of way to, you know, think through your supply chain then is then like, okay, if this extract, like on the table, right, I might have this particular ingredient, like it's a soothing ingredient that could either be derived from a plant or synthesized in a lab, or it could be produced by bacteria, which is like, it's bioengineering stuff, but like that's actually a new hot area of like ingredient production. Sometimes the ingredients that are synthesized in a lab, synthetic, right, or bioengineered, bacteria-produced ingredients, those two categories oftentimes are actually a more sustainable process from an energy and waste output to create ingredients rather than the plant-based alternatives. So I think, you know, from a beauty brand perspective, like look at kind of the new developing tech and understand that science and synthetic ingredients are not actually a bad thing. They're usually your friend when it comes to kind of looking at your waste and carbon profiles, but it's, again, by an ingredient basis. And I think that is kind of the hard part, that you have to like tease that out every time. And similar to what Nadia said, like going to the experts is your best bet, right? Like going to people that actually understand these supply chains is really, really important if you want to build a truly thoughtfully sustainable business. The second part of that is the consumer-facing pieces. So we utilize, like I said, a tech platform called Bluebird that kind of integrates our entire supply chain to really kind of help us monitor our waste and carbon outputs. And that isn't just for internal guidance, it's also for external communication. So as a brand, you know, you're doing all of these things behind the scenes to make your products more sustainable. You should be able to communicate that to your consumer and kind of get those brownie points and be able to stand out from the rest of the crowd who are, you know, either making blanket statements. You can do more educational stuff. Be transparent, bring your customers in, create community around it. Those are all really important things, and using tech to get there is actually really, really helpful because otherwise kind of doing your own like life cycle analysis is like a costly and difficult process. So having software to help you kind of corral all those pieces together and give you a full transparent picture is really helpful.
Yeah, that's a good point. Nadia, I kind of have the same question for you, and I think it should be an interesting one about how tech or AI has played a role in sort of incorporating sustainability into your business model as a menstrual care brand.
I mean, it's not really at the moment, to be fully transparent. I think that like a couple of things come up for me, which is that, you know, our products are not the most innovative out there, right? And as I said, like there are more sustainable products, whether that be menstrual cups or, you know, menstrual discs that are coming out. But in order to be a profitable business, we have to grow at scale. We raised quite a bit of VC money. We have expectations for growth. And I think at the end of the day, like I have worked with other reusable period care brands that introduced a great product, but it wasn't adopted because nobody knows how to use it, and we still are dealing with so much stigma on using reusables. So I think from the very beginning it was like, one, how do we make products that people will actually use, and how do we communicate the sustainability component so that it's understandable? Because like, I would consider myself a relatively smart person. Like I went to Harvard, I'm a young CEO, but I think I understood like 30% of what you said, and like 45% of what you said. And like, I know terms like renewable, and I know what an LED light is, but like, I think that one of the things that really comes up for us as we were building the company was like, we do so much work around inspection, third-party due diligence on supply chain or otherwise, talking about the difference of synthetic versus not, talking about organic cotton production. Those are things we do because it aligns with our values to be more sustainable. The majority of the efforts that we take to be more sustainable, we don't communicate because it's really fucking confusing, right? And so I think that like a huge part of our goal is like, look, we have a team on product development. We have our own fundraising plan for that product development. In order to sustain as a business, we have to grow at scale. And the way that we do that is introducing products that even if someone doesn't understand why they're more sustainable, they're just a better product. And they're cuter, they're more exciting to have, there's more of a community around it. You know, like I am a Gen Z consumer, I care about sustainability, I hate cardboard straws. You know, like, I think that's what we think about a lot, which is like, let's actually make sustainable products that people use and people understand, right? And I think that it's, another thing is like the word sustainable is like, you're not sustainable or not sustainable. Like sustainable is a spectrum. It's like, you know, and I think what's interesting is as each of us introduced our brands, we all said, we're actually sustainable, we're more sustainable, right? And so I think that a huge part of what we're trying to do is like, this is what we mean when we say sustainable. Here are areas of growth, right? And I think that's really important. And, you know, I think that I would also just say, like, from where we are in the messaging right now, it is really confusing because I think that especially younger Gen Z consumers who are trendsetters, like the biggest social media following you want to get, like, we're just understanding the term biodegradability, right? And understanding what that meant. Now there's legislation where even in California, no retail packaging starting in January can use the term biodegradable because the sustainable movement has said, hey, the whole biodegradability term is kind of BS when it ends up in an airtight landfill where not even a fucking banana peel biodegrades. Sorry about my cursing, I'm like really working on that. But you know, like that's what we're dealing with, where it's like, hey, we launched and we said biodegradable, like, oh wait, you know, if we're gonna be public about screw greenwashing, we're gonna also be very public about here's why we're rolling it back and not saying biodegradable. And so all that to say, like with tech and AI, like we're just focused on scaling this business, making killer products that are more sustainable, but again, assuming that most of our consumers don't understand what that means, that they'll buy the product anyways, and we have such a strong brand and community to do that. Are we keeping an eye on advancements in tech for product development? Yes, like I do want to launch a menstrual cup, but maybe part of the reason why I post my period blood on social media now is that I have millions of young people who I need to convince that it's okay to touch your menstrual blood so they actually use the fucking menstrual cup when we launch it, right? In terms of AI, like ChatGPT has been helpful, I don't know.
But I do, oh, sorry.
Oh, I just wanted to add one thing to what Nadia said, which I think is a really like fundamental point, is like, if you're making a consumer product that people don't want to buy, that's the least sustainable thing you could do. Like, you literally spend all these resources making a product that fundamentally isn't something that, you know, people would use regularly. I think the cardboard straws is a great example. Like, yes, on paper, fundamentally, those are like more sustainable than a plastic straw, but like, if nobody uses it, does it matter? No, right? Like, oh shoot. Like, that's the biggest piece. Like, we were always thinking about that. If you're not making a product that people will use, like, that's the line for us. It's like, it has to be good enough. It has to be better than what's out there. Okay, I'm done.
I do think, can I just build on what Lisa said for a second on technology and consumers? Because I do think there's a meta trend happening, and I think Gen Z is a part of it, which is it used to be perceived the more natural, the better in terms of sustainability, right? And I still think there is a piece of that that still holds true. But I think there's an increased awareness and understanding that technological advancement is going to be key to sustainability as well. And I think when you look at what's going on in the food tech movement, you've got cell-based meat, you have precision fermentation happening. I think 10 years ago, people would have been afraid to lean into that as Frankenstein food. And today, I think consumers are starting to understand, if I understand why it's good for me, and it truly is, and I understand why it's good for the environment, then I am open to technological innovation that's going to help solve part of the problem.
And it has to taste good.
Yeah, absolutely. But that's always been true.
Yeah.
I mean, on that point of like the changing tide of how consumers think, like I think especially among Gen Z, like having grown up in an era of like misinformation around like the COVID pandemic, the Trump administration, like I think people have really grown up in an era where like, you know, they're realizing, oh, like a lot of the stuff that I'm learning are like things that are untrue have real world consequences that affect people. And so like, I think, you know, especially in beauty particularly, that whole natural is better movement is really kind of disintegrating away because people are realizing that like, oh, like, you know, that natural is better movement means that like some of these beauty products are being launched without proper preservative systems and then they mold and then I have an eye infection suddenly. And like, no, but that's real. Like, so, I mean, there is like, I'd say a growing concern over kind of that misinformation around like sustainability, around like chemicals, all these things that are, you know, kind of having these effects and people are, I think there's a backlash to that, yeah.
Well, then how do you sort of convince consumers? How do you communicate that to consumers that your products are better and your products are more sustainable? There's nothing so scary about it, as Katie mentioned, when it comes to like cell-based food, and that you should be investing money in it, even if it's expensive.
Yeah, I think similar to Nadia, I have my own TikTok. Not to say you have to like go on a TikTok, oh my God. I'm gonna just use someone else's mic. Not to say that you have to like go on TikTok to convince the world, but like, you know, consumer education is the #1 thing and inspiring people through your products is the best way to do it. So the way we do it is really kind of this activist approach, you know, kind of using that kind of inspirational look at science rather than this, I think in the past, maybe like 5 years ago, people would view science as like this negative thing. I actually did my thesis on this in college, on chemophobia in beauty, which is the fear of chemicals. And chemistry was actually the most negatively viewed science out of all the major sciences. And it's not a mystery why. I mean, when you think of chemicals, what are you guys all thinking of? Pollution, you know, like literally like toxic waste, like it seriously is what comes up for people. And that's actually a big problem in the advancement of food science and the advancement of cosmetic science, you know, all medicine, like a big pharma, that's what people are thinking of. So it's actually like a whole, you have to run this almost like re-education campaign around like, what is a chemical? Like like why shouldn't we be afraid of, you know, lab-grown meat? Or like, why is that actually sometimes a better thing? Or like, why should we not be afraid of preservatives in our products? You know, what are the cost-benefit analysis that you have to make as a consumer? Like, it's a lot of education, and it's going to be on a spectrum of how many people listen, but I think the overarching arc of that is towards a more educated society that cares more about kind of the advancement of technology, and I think especially around climate change, younger consumers are really concerned about that, and knowing that there's like, seeing that people are adopting not real solutions to help with the climate is a huge like source of anxiety fundamentally. So when you can connect it to that, I think it helps people listen.
Yeah, I would say kind of building off of that, like I think it's also choosing your battles of what you're going to communicate, right? Like we don't spend a lot of time talking about why our farming process of 100% organic content, identifying that distributor, like we don't spend a lot of time communicating that, again, because the reason we're committing to sustainability is not just for the marketing, it's like, no, we're gonna do that regardless of even if nobody knew about it. So I would say that a lot of it is like picking and choosing, because I do think that Gen Z consumers are very concerned about the climate crisis, but they are very impatient about taking the time to understand what that actually means and how what you're consuming kind of ladders up to that. I think, you know, we also have to recognize that we live in an attention economy where the average Gen Z attention span is shorter than a fucking goldfish. It's like 8 seconds. And so for me, that doesn't mean that you can't capture their prolonged attention, but it's like you have a few seconds to convince them to just like stay and binge watch your content, right? And if in those first seconds I'm talking about like, I don't even know, like some terms that I don't understand, or like honestly, if I hear the word chemical, like I hated chemistry. That's like the one B I got in high school, you know, like I just like keep, you know, but I think a lot of it is just like how do you make it entertaining, the first little bit entertaining and interesting, and kind of use that as a Trojan horse to do that education. That's like, for us, like a very small product change we made was that the pad wrappers are compostable, but people don't actually hang on to that word compostable. Instead, we just show that if you put it in hot water, it immediately melts. And so what we do is like we say it breaks down, like this language where it's like, oh, like I don't know anything about sustainability, but like this breaks down, and if I show you the plastic one, it's still there, right? And like we talk about that, it gets the millions of views, and then we keep people in by just really, really, not, I don't want to say dumbing down, but like making the language more accessible, but also making it like fun and exciting to look at, right? Like another thing that you see is like, if you take a match and you light this pad on fire, it catches on fire. If you do it on ours, it doesn't, right? And like that's all they need to know. And I think what's super interesting is when one of the things I think we've done really well is engage user-generated content, where like we have fan pages, like 14-year-old girls who we've never met before, who like have an account that says August fan page, and they're just doing all their unboxings and they like love the brand. When they talk about and promote the brand, they don't go into sustainability. All they say is this is actually sustainable, right? And I don't think that they're curious to really understand what that even means, but I think that shows the value of brand trust. Like we really show up and follow through with our actions, and like if someone does ask, we have blogs and blogs and blogs explaining the more scientific part of it. The majority of people don't care. They just are like, if I trust you and you say it's sustainable and my friends say it's sustainable, then it's more sustainable, right? And so it's interesting when we see how our biggest fans, who's, you know, climate champion in their Instagram bio, when they talk about how much they love our brand, all they say is less plastic, more sustainable, full stop, period. And so like for us, it's like, if we can just make sure that if someone does come to us and they want to know all the answers, we have it backed up. We know what we do, we know why we do it, we know the accuracy of it. But I think from a consumer standpoint, we're also focused on like, it needs to be entertaining. We need to be able to compete in a very, very intense attention economy. And at the end of the day, they need to be so excited they're going to tell all their friends about it, even if they don't really understand it. And I think that's really why we've been able to grow in the way we are.
And I mean, both of you have like interesting point of views on, I think, you know, communicating that message through social media. You're both Gen Z, young millennials. But for Katie, how is Bowery Farm able to do that? How are you able to communicate that to your consumers, especially the younger ones who, as Nadia said, have an 8-second attention span? So
that, and I don't think there's like a silver bullet here. I think it's actually more complex for us because we have different messages at different points in the customer journey, right? So we absolutely understand the messaging that needs to work on packaging on shelf for us. Which is much more functional benefits to the consumer, right? Pesticide-free, longer, fresher, great tasting. And then we find them at different points in their customer journey, whether that's online, whether that's in real life, where they're thinking about a broader set of things around the environment, sustainability, creating with food, and that's where we'll engage with them there. But it's more of a complex matrix of comm strategy for sure.
Unfortunately, I feel like we might have to open up for audience questions. So, yes.
I would say, honestly, there really aren't that many like, hot tips. I would say it's like kind of brute force a little bit, like the way we've gone through it. I mean, you can definitely like get recommendations from people. Like the reason we work also with our like third-party partner is because they have connections to like folks in the manufacturing space that are actually building like 100% PCR bottles. Like, oh my God. Thank you. We focus on like taking the onus off of the consumer to know if something is like recyclable in their municipality or not. Like we focus on like on our side of the puzzle, our supply chain, we should be including as much like recycled plastic as possible if we're including plastic, right? So if we're making a box, like make it out of recycled cardboard, right? Like those are the choices that we're making. And so finding those suppliers, like getting a partner, again, who is the expert, who knows how to find those folks, or making connections there is the best possible thing you can do.
Do you guys want to add something to that?
I would have very similar comments to Lisa. I think the only other thing maybe to contemplate is scale is where the unlock is, right? Because to do something differently is expensive, and if your volume is starting off small, it's even more expensive. So I don't know if there's a way to look at cross-collaboration with other folks in your industry or adjacencies that might be able to bring scale to bear with some of the manufacturers to bring the cost down on a more sustainable or recyclable option.
Yeah, I think, sorry, I'll be really fucking quick. So I think that a lot of it is also just understanding, like, I do not think of TikTok as an immediate converting, tool, right? Like, in the grand scheme of like, the typical marketing funnel, like, I think TikTok is like top of funnel lead generation. Like, and so I think that those are the people who are like, hey, I like it, but it's $65. Like, they need more convincing. So for us, like, when we have a video go viral on TikTok, I very rarely expect that to convert to sales. Where I look at it is I'm gonna see Google ad spend be a lot more efficient and email and SMS growth go up, right? And so I think that for us, like, yes, we spend a lot of time on TikTok, but that is just like the tip of the iceberg in terms of content, because like, I think that someone will watch a video of us on TikTok, maybe they'll follow, ideally they go to the website, they read about it there, they read the reviews, they see UGC, then they like join some of our events. Like, I do not expect TikTok to just be like the ultimate converter, and I think that a lot of brands, like I have several friends who run brands where they have a huge following and their sales are not growing, right? And I think that that's where it's like, how do you build out a whole marketing and content structure around your TikTok, so even as you're growing audience, you're getting visitors, you have a full-fledged plan on how you're gonna convert that follower to someone who actually buys. And I think part of it is like, okay, hey, we'll do it so we charge you $15 over the next 4 months, right? And we'll do like that, whatever that tool is, Klarna or something, like we'll do that, and like, we'll get you an email. We have really strong web flows. We're gonna like really get into the nitty gritty on like your SMS flows and like work with that and optimizing. So I think a lot of it is just like, TikTok is just like the hello, and then everything else is getting them to convert, yeah.
Great, is that all the time we have?
And then, all right, so we have one more question, and it's lunchtime, and there are tote bags downstairs, so I want you guys to be able to take one. Thank you. I'll try to make it quick. I'm Guerrera, founder of Nadia, for Jeena.
No, it's working. I think you just have to be loud. Yeah. It's working.
Hello, I'm Dara. I'm the founder of Seawell. We're a gender all-natural brand for Gen Z, so body care and vitamins, compostables, and 100% PCR. But before this career, I actually worked for the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation in vaccine development and Ebola, TB, malaria, and HIV, and it's one of the worst environmental businesses, right? But we're saving lives. So we have this vaccine, it goes all over the world, and it's saving lives with landfills, so I think there's this trade-off between what we're trying to do for the world in general and then the business we're building. And so now I'm taking this into being a founder in a very different space and thinking about it constantly. I guess my question to all of you is, and at the next stage of business development is the VC and the investors. And are you getting, I'm curious, are you getting those questions? Are the investors curious about how you're building in sustainability and building that business? Or is it just like saving lives and growing, and it's kind of the afterthought?
I actually think it's getting to be a very complex environment to the answer to that question. I was at the Milken Institute in LA a couple weeks ago on a view from the boardroom where the opening shot of the question was, is ESG now considered woke capitalism? And the board was completely split across the stage on that. And I think, and I think if you'd asked that 2 or 3 years ago, ESG was embraced by so many people, and now I think there's a little politicalization going on with it. So I think you've got to be really focused as a founder on what your values are. And if you do that and you focus on the economics and the values of the company, you will get the right investors for your business. And there is still a ton of capital out there that is interested, particularly in solving really hard issues as it relates to the environment.
Yeah, I mean, fundamentally, VCs exist to make money if you make money, right? And so, like, I would say, yeah, sure, they care about sustainability and they're passionate about it, but like, they're not going to invest in you if you're not going to 10x their money, or if they don't have like a certain level of confidence. So I think that, like, I mean, it's hard for me coming from the nonprofit world. It's like, no, we're not just being sustainable because like it's trendy. It's like you do it because that's just the right thing to do. I think that investors, like, they care about sustainability. Obviously, we love that a lot of our investors care about like the cultural change we're making. But when they do due diligence, they're not looking at that. They're simply looking at the numbers. They're simply looking at, what a potential path to profitability looks like. I think, unfortunately, a lot of sustainable brands out there, especially in the beauty space, you've seen a lot of brands come in and a lot of brands go right out the door because, like, literally they come in, they don't have the ability to communicate what makes theirs different. I'm not gonna fuck with my skin and try things that isn't really working. So if it doesn't scale, it doesn't survive, right? And now it's an even harder time to raise capital. And so I think that we lead with the fact that we are a fast growing business. The reason we're fast growing is because we've been able to make a killer sustainable product that people actually understand, right? But with investors, sustainability is not investable unless it's scalable. And I think that that's the unfortunate reality of capitalism.
They definitely look at it as mitigating business risk though, right? I mean, that's another way you can think about it in those conversations. But again, it goes back to the economics.
Yeah, I was just gonna say from a business risk perspective, I do think some of the investors that we have and ones we're talking to, absolutely in due diligence, it's exactly what Nadia said, that's the reality. But especially in beauty, I think, part of our, discussion around our brand is greenwashing. I mean, sustainability is, I would say, the second tier of our pitch. Our first tier is that we're going to be a fast-growing brand because we make products that actually work. And that people actually want to use. And oh, by the way, they're actually fitting in with kind of the growing, call for sustainability. But we know that's not the reason people buy products at the end of the day. That's not the reason people are buying products. It's a check mark that people can add to their list when they're comparing products, but it's not their sole reason. So yeah, in your pitch, just make sure that sustainability isn't the only kind of driver there. But yeah, I mean, there is a business risk that if you are a brand that's greenwashing or haven't validated strong sustainability claims that you're making, there is a marketing risk to that in the future that I think more and more investors are paying attention to. Not everyone, but more consumer investors are.
All great points, but I suppose that's all the time we have today. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us, and thank you for coming.
Thank you so much, guys. I know it was tight on time. All right, guys, so it is lunchtime. I know you guys are hungry, so there's food downstairs. We have Caro, we have Saverly, we have some sandwiches. BOWERY Farm also donated some salad, so please be able to try everything. And there are tote bags downstairs that you guys can pick up. See you in an hour. Hi. Really? No, no. Oh, thank you.
I was wearing the same thing.